Welcome. PTSD, Survivors versus Science. Let's begin. So I have a timeline here split on the top and bottom of this page. On the top right, it goes from 1900 BC, and to the left it is 0, and then it comes down to the bottom of the page, going from 0 to 1980 on the far right. We'll be discussing the history from 1900 BC to 1980, the history of anxiety via these two timelines. How did it progress? When did it start? So why don't you take a guess with the possibility of when do you think it started? Anxiety. Focus on the women. When do you think it started? All right, take your guess. I'm going to assume that it's in. And it happened actually in 1900 BC when Egyptians recorded behavioral abnormalities in adult women on medical papyrus. That's paper and not like medicinal marijuana. It wasn't medicinal papyrus. It was just paper. It was paper developed from an herb that happened to be about as thick as cardboard, from my understanding and research. And the papyrus stood the test of time for that record and data point to be observed. Then in 600 BC, the Greek mythology gives us the god Pan, who gives us panic as he was frolicking in the woods with his nymphs, scaring them, doing whatever he did, frolicking in the woods. We got panic. So how did it progress? And anxiety and hysteria especially. It took 1,300 years for these first two data points. How did it progress from there? What was next? Go ahead and take a guess. Did it accelerate by 50% and then somewhere after the crucifixion of Christ, maybe 50 AD, it did something before the fall of Israel in 10 or 70 AD? Did it happen around then, or was it some other time? Go ahead, cast your votes, and I'll assume they're in. Almost in the 1800s. Okay, so 6 and 1800, it was 2,400 years later after Pan. So that's what we get there. So let's go focus here on the lower right-hand corner where all the action seems to be taking place. In 1774, Mesmer produced an artificial tide in patient Francesca Osterlin, who had suffered from hysteria. He gave her an iron-based decoction. She probably drank it and used magnets so that she could feel this as it went through her. Then Charcot had a hysteria painting of another patient in 1887, 110 years later. So you can see things are starting to accelerate a little bit. And then who was leading the way? Survivors versus Science. Okay, we take a look at some of the descriptions here. We have hysteria overtaking panic somewhere in the 1700s, and it starts vague with behavioral abnormalities. You can see the trend here is going from the vague to the specific. Okay, an artificial tide to hysteria. Okay, and then 15 years after Charcot, in 1900, Freud published his the interpretation of dreams, and basically interpreted dreams of the unconscious, desires, and experiences. A little vague, and then later Charles Myers described soldiers who were involuntarily shivering, crying, fearful, and having constant intrusions of memory, and he coined the term of shell shock. So, who was leading the way? Panic, shell shock. Who was leading the way here? Survivors versus Science. Okay, and in 1980, PTSD was just about to get on the books. It wasn't even defined yet. So that'll lead us into experientially, survivors had 3,880 years. Experience where looking upon them, the doctors, they knew something was going on, but they were like kind of almost late to the game, or late defining the game, so to speak. So that brings us to part 2. Hope you stay tuned for that. Comment, share, like, and click the bell to receive notifications.